All right. Hi, everyone. Ramadan Kareem, and I just wanted to welcome people back we went on a mid-season break, but I just wanted to say that for those that are joining us for the first time, the Artist Talk series was established in April 22, and it really was a way to bring artists together during times of the pandemic, but just in general, carrying that forward and to be able to learn about other people's practices, and also just a little insight on their daily life. And with these artists, it really is a safe space. So we'd like to ask questions, and it's a very natural conversation. And and I just wanted to introduce our fifth artist for the second season is Ayman Zedani, and I'm going to be reading his bio. So Zedani's practice attempts to renegotiate the relationship between the human and more than human worlds in relation to the future of the planet, and more specifically, the future of the Gulf. His recent projects include a permanent installation titled Terrapolis at the Sustainability Pavilion Expo 2020, Between the Heavens and the Earth in the Lahore Biennial in 2020, Earthseed and Noor AlRiyadh Festival in 2021. And for this one specifically, I'm going to ask everyone to turn off their videos and to also keep yourselves on mute, as this is a performative talk. And if you have any questions, to please write them down in the chat box and we'll get to a few of them at the end. So without further ado, Ayman, if you'd like to begin.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us today. I will be talking about a few projects from the past few years, and more specifically about the untold stories, the seeds of initiation, places, protagonists, and more. And we will start with the reading by Sarah.
It matters what matters we use to think other matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots, not knots, what thoughts think thoughts. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories.
My previous city was located next to Souq al-Bahar in Sharjah, one of the oldest markets that relied on goods exchange from and to the world through the sea. Since I moved to it back in 2016, the barrier between the souk and my space slowly started to dissolve, extending that exchange to my practice as well. When I was going to the city one day, I decided to pick some of the dried plants from the market to create natural pigments that I could use. I saw an odd-looking plant, and I asked what was it, and I was told it was Kaf Maryam from Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. Then I asked, well, what do people use it for? For many reasons, the guy replied, including female infertility. At this point, I was really intrigued in knowing more about this pattern of place, plant, and practice. So I picked some of them to try to find out more. In this city, I realized if you soak them in water long enough, they start to open up like a human hand, and they release their seeds that have been kept in pockets for when they meet a body of water. The scientific name of it is Anesthetica hyracantica, and it is a resurrection plant that can survive extreme dehydration for years. When you couple that with the story of Maryam bint Imran, things will start to make much more sense to the naming and the usage as well. Also, for many reasons, I do believe that this practice could be a cultural meme from ancient Arabia that has seeped to our current time, but I'm still looking more into it. Both Souq al-Bahar and Kaf Maryam have initiated part of my practice that still unfolds until today. Some of the related projects are Non-Human Assembly, which was part of the March project at Sharjah Art Foundation in 2018. Another project is Bahar Bashar Shajar Hajar solo exhibition at Athar Gallery, curated by Murtaza Vali in 2019. The third project is Between the Heavens and the Earth, in collaboration with Ahmed Makkiya, which was part of the second edition of the Lahore Biennial, curated by Sheikh Rahbar al-Qasimi in early 2020.
The concept of assemblage is helpful. Ecologists turn to assemblages to get around the sometimes fixed and bounded connotations of ecological community. The question of how the varied species in a species assemblage influence each other, if at all, is never settled. Some eat each other, others work together to make life possible. Still others just happen to find themselves in the same place. Assemblages are open-ended gatherings. They allow us to ask about communal effects without assuming them. They show us potential histories in the making. Assemblages don't just gather lifeways, they make them. Thinking through assemblage urges us to ask, how do gatherings sometimes become happenings? That is, greater than the sum of their parts.
Another location of importance to my practice is Noor Island in Sharjah. During the excavation of Khalid's Lake in the 70s, two spots were really hard to remove. So the decision was made to keep them as two islands in the middle of the lake, which we know them now as Al-Majaz and An-Noor Island. Inaugurated in 2015, An-Noor Island is home to over 70,000 curated and planted trees and plants, some of which are non-native, including an ancient olive tree that has been brought in all the way from Spain. During the daytime, the island looks a bit normal. In the evenings, however, it turns into a scene out of James Cameron's Avatar, with the glowing plants, colorful light strings climbing up the trees, and LED light projectors showering everything in between. This sort of packaged nature is not an unusual thing in the region. However, my interest was in the emergence out of the weaving between nature and technology, the accidental creation of a novel ecology that has been utilized by some of the island's recent critters. An example is, I noticed that small lizards can be found on almost every light fixture on the ground, which can only signify the fact that they are using them for heat regulation of their bodies. Some of the related projects are Becoming With, which was part of the previous mentioned solo exhibition, and Between Models and Tangles, which was part of the Speculative Landscapes exhibition at NYU Abu Dhabi Art Gallery, curated by Maya Allison in 2019.
According to the classic theory of fossil fuels, petroleum was formed as a Tellurian entity, under unimaginable pressure and heat in the absence of oxygen and between the strata in absolute isolation. Maybe oil is the return of the repressed, using humanity as a parasite uses its host to get free from the earth and to exert power within the atmosphere, to hasten the warming of the earth, to make it a bit more like the sun, and to move the earth beyond this chapter of its history via the extinction of its host animals.
While I was looking for ancient life forms that have existed in the region, I came across Prototaxis, an ancient giant fungi that ruled the earth until the late Devonian periods. Preserved remnants of it have only been found in a few places in the world, including Saudi Arabia and the United States. During the research, I was trying to comprehend the long story arc of the earth and the time scale on which natural processes occur. Like, how long did it take these early decomposers of matter to shapeshift to oil? And though it's a bit impossible to grasp the time scale, trying to understand it enriches one's own experience and provide a sense of kinship to everything on the earth, past, present, and future. The related project is The Return of the Old Ones, in collaboration with Saira Ansari, which was part of the I Love You Urgently exhibition at the 2139 Jeddah Arts, curated by Maya Al-Khalil in early 2020.
All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change.
As I was telling a friend of mine about Prototaxis, and as I was showing her some of the renders of how it might look like, she said that there is something similar to it, but very small, that still exists today. She was referring to a parasitic plant called Cynomorium. Cynomorium has been a companion to the desert people for a very long time. It has a reddish pigment that has been used to mark the cattle and to dye the fabric. And it's the source of food as well. It has a complicated gene map that it is hard to pin down since it's been relying on other desert-rich biodiversity to survive by integrating itself to different host plants, exchanging DNA in the process. It contains an archive of the desert's history and the keys to livable futures. The related projects are Earthseed, in collaboration with Widad Khadrawi, which was part of the inaugural edition of Noor AlRiyadh Festival in 2021. And there's also an upcoming project, hopefully end of this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayman, for sharing a few anecdotes and stories and a little bit of insight into the projects that you just spoke about. I know this presentations in general during artist talks are much longer than this, but I think this was kind of short and sweet, and it allows for more of a conversation with the creatives and the creatives that are here today. So if anyone has any questions or you'd like Ayman to go back to a certain project that was of interest to you, if you'd like to just write that down in the chat, and then we can go back to any slide and he can speak about a little bit more about the project that you're interested in, or if you have a specific question as well. But I'll just start and ask you, Ayman, like when we were having our initial conversations planning for this talk, you just started with the idea of art and science merging. And could you just possibly tell us a story or where this interest may have sparked a little insight as to why your practice is the way it is?
So basically, I grew up in the south of Saudi, and I remember one day like our science teacher took us outside to show us the prism experiment. And you know how it goes basically, but the interesting thing that just kind of made a connection for me at that stage is when I saw the light coming out of the prism and too many different lights, I kind of thought like this was something similar to al-qat or the arts of al-qat, which is basically this traditional art that is being done in the south where usually women paint their house with like very specific belts around the rooms. For some reason, I thought these two things are overlapping and related in some way. And obviously, another thing is my background, educational background, is in science. So for me to actually move from that to doing art full time in a way there are some things that still seeps out of those practices that I've learned into this practice anyway. And
with your projects, it seems to me there's like a focus for each one, whether it is like through a plant, perhaps. I'm just wondering, how do you narrow down what you're interested in for your projects? And I'm just asking, can you please write the name of the practice? How do you write it, Ayman?
Actually,
that correct?
It's بالعربي, it's al-qat, like afta. In English, it's something equivalent to that, basically.
And okay, just going back to that, sorry. I remember you said the last woman who was actually practicing this just passed away. So like relearning and having like generations kind of learn that practice is going to be. Do you believe there's going to be a shift in that, and how is that going to change?
Well, I mean, recently it's been added to the UNESCO, as one of the one of the highlights, and I think because of that, it's been revived, I guess, in a part, because it's been kind of like losing. It's a tradition that has been kind of slowly disappearing until recently, obviously with a lot of effort. It's been revived, and there's a lot of people who are actually practicing it today and looking more into it, because there is a lot of also things that is not really totally understood in terms of like the shapes, symbols, and the meanings, and how there's a lot of also like cultural memes that is from like the early point of like these practices that is not clear until now. So people like to start looking into it.
And talking about something of like the revival of the past, like through tradition, something on the opposite end that you look into with your art is the ideas of the future. So can you talk a little bit about your interest in that and how that manifests in your practice?
So I'm interested in like in the, first of all, like the dynamics between the human and non-human, or like the human more than human worlds, and how this is basically, is developing. So the way like my project kind of come about is I usually can notice something that is not being noticed. Like I usually have these, I call them like micro experiences with the non-human worlds that becomes some sort of an obsession, and I kind of look more into them. And these like micro experiences is what I usually take and amplify into installation work. I mean, this image that you're seeing here is like literally the first thing that made me want to explore the island more, because without like come across this coincidence of these critters like utilizing these lights, or like the heat coming out of the light, I wouldn't really dive deep into it. But everything links to a very specific small, like moment that could actually be dismissible, in most cases.
Would you say that, okay, there's a question before I ask one. I'm going to give the chance for another question from the audience. Shazia is asking, can you tell us more about your work specifically between the heavens and the earth?
So toward the end of the non-human, non-human assembly, let me actually just go back to it. So during the project of non-human assembly, the work was basically placed at Beit Hussein Makrani, and Beit Hussein Makrani had like two different rooms in Charge Art Foundation art spaces, and one of the rooms had like the results of like some of the experiments that he did before that you can see here, and the other room was like an ongoing room where there was like a fermentation process that was happening in the room. Toward the end of the exhibition, I ended up like with two things, like the work that was in the first room that was like literally buried in the courtyard of Beit Hussein Makrani, and the other part of the work was made into these different masks. Now, these different masks like came into play during the Biennial because according to the curator, she wanted me to continue on the same project and develop that even more. So I made 5 of these masks, and I decided to link them to something that is happening in the region, which is this sort of like movement of like embracing pre-Islamic heritage in the region, and by highlighting these as a found masks that belongs to pre-Islamic Arabia in a way. And I worked in this project with Ahmed Makki. Ahmed Makki basically provided some sort of a short story about these masks and how they were found. So the work in the installation was presented as an actual, like factual, factual thing in a way. But obviously, it wasn't really totally. I mean, it was fictional in a way, and we implemented something in the text that might actually highlight that in a way. But we wanted people to actually believe that it was a found objects and they're not made.
You said it was a continuation from a previous project?
Yeah, from the non-human assembly project.
Okay.
Which is this one.
And Amna's asking, what is the material? Specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, Amna, but did you mean of the masks? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So basically, the material is called biofilms, and it's a material that comes out of a mixture of microbial community of yeast and bacteria, coupled with sugar and caffeine, and the byproduct of these microbial communities eating on the sugar or like feeding on the sugar is this layer of biofilm that become on the top of the container that the community are growing in. And when you take the material, you can actually dry it, and it's very similar, like it has a very similar texture to a leather or skin in a way, which is why I thought it would be kind of interesting to use these into these two projects. Another thing that is worth mentioning, a non-human assembly, like I collected these different like herbs from the spice market in Sharjah or Suq al-Bahar. And they were collected like very specifically from the Manasa region, because the idea was trying to grow some sort of a skin-like material that like metaphorically and literally represents like a skin of the region, a challenging current kind of situation.
And we have a question from Sarah Brahim. She's asking, what does the word indigenous mean to you in your work? And do you think something carries more or less weight based on this term?
So the way I became really interested in this whole idea of the new materialist philosophies is because I was really interested in indigenous practices in the region, or like in Arabia, basically. And obviously we lost a lot of the information and a lot of the practices that is being done, which could actually be really interesting to look into. I mean, the idea of, for example, having like some sort of a relationship with the land by like taking a stone from the surrounding place to the house and putting it like in a place in the house where it's almost like in a shelf in a way that establishes some sort of a relationship between the persons who own the land and with the land itself. So these obviously, all of this kind of links to animism in a broader sense. And it is something that I'm really interested in, from not only from the region, but from all over the world.
We also have another question from Miriam. She's asking, do you think of your projects as parts of a bigger work? Like you might be creating an ecosystem of your own?
That's totally it. Like for me, all of these projects are coming out of each other. There is certainly like a very specific kind of DNA that links all of these works together. And they do like imagine them as part of a world in which they will be together at some point, in the future. So yeah, I mean, that's very accurate actually.
I'd be really interested just to even, like, I can't even start to imagine how that would look like, but I'd be very interested to see that all come together.
Yeah, me both.
And Moza is saying that Mariam also asked about resources, which I'm hoping to hear about too. Sorry, resources in terms of are there any books that you're currently reading that have influenced your work? It doesn't have to be currently, but are there a few that have influenced? Or maybe you could also let us know what you're currently reading for possibly your upcoming project. To share with everyone.
Obviously, okay. Thank you, Sarah. So basically, it's the books that we've listed here, and we took some parts of, which is Staying with the Trouble by Dan Haraway, and also The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anat Singh, Cyclonopedia by Raza Negrestani, and also Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. And I think like there are like also other books that you could probably look into, like Vibrant Matter by Jane Bennett. And also there's a book, I forget the author of the book, but it's called Timefulness, which is really interesting book about the story, like the long story arc of the earth in a way. So these are like the books that I'm really currently, interested in and reading more into.
And I'll also put them on Instagram in the comments as to the 4 readings parts of the readings that were spoken out loud today. And just, going back to Mariam's question about creating an ecosystem and putting all the work together. I was very interested, and that's how I stumbled upon your work. Actually, the first time was through Speculative Landscapes in the NYUAD Art Gallery. And your work was the first when you walked into the exhibition. And it very much felt like you're walking into a controlled environment, or even like an environment that you've created with the different aspects of your work, even the way the chairs were placed, from the colors that were chosen. And I can even see that the color, that magenta color, has been used quite prominently in other projects as well. So I was just wondering, how is that something that you are aware of? Like, sorry, I'm just trying to find my words. Are you actively creating an environment with your projects? And then the second part of my question is, how important is like setup for you in terms of your artworks?
Okay, so the question has like 3 different aspects. The first one is I want to talk a little bit about the project between Muddles and Tangles. And like when I was invited by Maya, there was like a very specific emphasis on the way in which like how, like that we live in an age of like an anxiety and everything is a little bit like on an edge. And with that in mind, like I wanted to create, also like she was really interested on a video that I did before that is very similar to the overall kind of look of the project. And we talked together about like creating a space in which could actually, like some part of it will be an environment for like non-human to thrive, but also like in the other part of the installation space will be a place where human can thrive in a way. And I remember like how anxious I was like just during like uni days, and I wanted to create a space in which the students also like at NYU could use in a way. And so this is like the first part in that I wanted to focus on. The second part is the color that is being used here, and also like in between the heavens and the earth is it's basically a grow light that comes in this very specific color, which kind of helps these different plants that was either like in between Muddles and Tangles or between the heavens and the earth to grow through all the exhibition in a way. The third part, I think, I can't remember, was the last thing, the last part of the question you asked.
Yeah, it's connected, but it could also be a question of its own. Is that how do you start like setup for your works? Because it seems like it is quite controlled. And how important is the way that you display your work?
So yeah. So basically, it is some sort of a setup. Like, I do approach everything within like my works as almost like creating like a movie in a way. So everything is controlled, and like the script is controlled, the scenery is controlled. There's like always this feel of trying to perfect like a narrative, not only like by the narrative itself, but also like by the environment in which the narrative occurred. And all of this is obviously is to give the best possible like experience for people to actually experience the work and get more into the overall, kind of goal that have been, going through trying to achieve the work in a way. Because there are like a lot of, there is like a very intentional way of creating the work, but also there is like an unintentional things that also like happens in the process. And I'm trying as much as possible to carry some of these elements to the final work for people to experience.
Jihan is asking if you could go back to the slide that talks about change, specifically the text slide. Ayman, if you'd like to speak a little bit more why you chose these specific sentences from the book. I do highly recommend the book. I have read it. I was just telling Ayman the other day, like when we were having a rehearsal, I was like, these words sound so familiar. And then when he put the name to the text, it all kind of came together. So I do highly recommend this book. But yeah, if you'd like to just talk a little bit about it.
Okay, so basically these words are the central verse of this fictional religion by Octavia Butler which is called Earthseed, which is based on this idea of, the goal of all humanity is to leave the planet in a way. So I was really interested in this idea, but also like there's a high emphasis on the idea of change and how everything is not, is not fixed in a way. And we tend to forget these sort of like, ideas. And obviously there is like a more deeper understanding if you read the book or like also, dive deep into her writing in general. But it is something that I thought like would be kind of interesting. I was like, it's the title of the work that actually was here. What was that? Riyadh Light Festival a few months ago.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm not really sure how I want to even frame this question as well, but are you dissecting, is there any project where you're like dissecting plants as well?
So actually there's something that I've been really trying for a while, which is not really dissecting, but since Kef Mariam is a resurrection plant in a sense, that means if you put it in water, like it actually comes back to life. So like you wouldn't really need much to put like this small plant in a water and just like let it grow. And this is something that obviously was part of Between Muddles and Tangles, if you can actually see in this part here. Right. These plants, the exhibition was like for 3 months, and these plants were like actually growing during this period of the 3 months. And as the organic material that was part of the non-human assembly was also like buried somewhere in the campus of NYU. So some of the works are actually buried like all over the UAE.
That's really interesting because it's like it kind of goes back to a different place. It's not its origin either. So it's like
shapeshift. It's just like, it's just shapeshift into something completely new. And I actually, after like burying some of the organic material in Beit Hassan Makrani, I came after a few days after, and I realized there were like small mushrooms that actually grow out of the ground. I know, it was kind of interesting. It was like maybe they were trying to communicate with me through these mushrooms, but
start work of their own. That's really interesting because I was thinking like, where do these works go after that they've been displayed? Specifically the one about NYU and the one with the masks as well, where you're growing things as well. Okay, very interesting. And if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. would you like to talk about any upcoming projects where your interest lies currently, your research? What are you doing now?
So, as I mentioned in the last slide, like I'm actually working more on Cyanomorium, like developing the story of it even more, because I mean, it is a very interesting, information carrier in a way. Like an idea that I was really thinking about is like, how could we actually, think of this as an information carrier that can be sent to space, like a golden Voyager like situation. And this is like the project that I'm working on right now, but obviously there is other things that I can't really talk about just yet.
Okay. And when you're creating these works, and just going back to like plants as well, like specifically with the plant that when you put it in water, it expands. And when you take it out, it starts to like curdle again. And as artists, we say like we create work, but I feel like with your work, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like create has a heavier weight because you literally are also creating. I don't know if it's because it's tied to nature and somehow, but I think there's a heavier weight with the word create in your practice. I felt like, okay, as artists, we say like, oh, I've created this and I've made this, but the word create, I feel has a heavier weight in your practice because you actually are creating, or a creator, I would say. And maybe that's just the link because you're working a lot with like the non-human or nature, perhaps. But I'm just wondering, have you ever thought of yourself like as a creator?
I mean, well, I think the reason, or like the idea, like why you would notice that is because I do work with like non-human, like living organisms or like collaborators in a way. So it becomes kind of easy like to actually think of it that way. But the important thing is also to say that I do think of these things as collaborators, not just like stuff that I'm creating or like working with. So it is very important to also highlight the fact that these things have actually put some work into the work in a way, and did produce the work with me as well.
And just expanding on that, have you ever like crossbred, like with one organism to another or one species to another?
I mean, so maybe in a fictional sense, but like not in a real way, I guess. But I mean, it could be something that could be looked at. But I am interested in these. Like, I mean, if you actually, somebody was telling me about this creature that was in one of the Margaret Atwood's like novels, and it's called the Pagoon, which is like half pig, half human. And these sort of like fictional creatures were like bred in a way as a human body parts replacements, which is quite a horrific and also like an interesting idea to look at. But it's it's these sort of hybrids like that is quite interesting. But I think I do think of them in a fictional sense, and maybe there are like a lot of things that we consider normal, but they actually are, they have actually made it to now by integrating itself to other creatures in a way. I mean, Donna Haraway, like in her book, she mentioned something about the first like multicellular creatures were not actually made by a sense of reproduction, but it was more of like something in relation to indigestion in a way, and a cell just tried to eat another cell and could not really dissolve that within it, and basically they became like two cells, and it just kind of increased from there in a way. But it's also like all these different ideas is quite interesting to look at, and all these questions that you've been asking, or like this last question is, it's what kind of like really drive the process of looking more into how things come about in like a very subtle way, like these, like, again, with these micro experiences, these things that somebody else like would look at and just like really dismiss and not really think of as anything of interest, is the thing that usually for me just starts is like the seeds in which like these projects are actually come about.
And just like continuing off of that, we have a question that's asking just how would you describe your process? Maybe just in a few sentences.
So basically, I need to create an environment in which like these micro experiences that I've been referring to can occur as well. I don't really wait for things to happen. Like I usually just go and scavenge for things that could actually becomes like a focal point of interest, and it just turns into. And there's a lot of moments in which like these things did not really pan out in anything, but some of them did, and this is like how I feel like in relation to my practice.
And we do have a few other questions. There's 3 more, and I think that allows. Oh, there's 4. There are 4, and I think that'll keep us until 11 p.m. or a few minutes before then. So the first question says, would you situate your work in the frame of Arab futurism? And are there any artists that inspire you, or you would put your work in the context of?
I mean, I think you can possibly say that, but I don't know. I feel like we are like in the midst of all of this, and it's kind of hard to, maybe in retrospect, all of this will make sense. I don't think it's it's kind of hard to just like actually assume that you're part of something in a way. I do really look at, there are like few artists that I'm really interested in their works. And people like Sofia Maria is one of the people that I'm really intrigued by her work as well. And I really do appreciate what she does.
And there's a question from Mohamed. I feel like it's, he's asking, do you find it easier to collaborate with organisms or people? Aren't people organisms anyways? Or am I just...
Yeah, but I got his point.
No, yeah.
Well, so I feel like at the early stage, I slowly started working with non-human collaborators, and then obviously followed by human ones. And now I'm also looking at more collective in a way. So I would say it's not about easy or not. It's just about really finding the right collaborators to work with, or the people that actually might be might have a common interest, or share the common interest in a way of whatever you're trying to make. So I would say they're all equal in a way.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions for today. Just want to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thank you to Ayman. It was quite different than all the other artist talks, so I just feel like it's very interesting what an artist brings to the hour each time, and allowed for more conversation as well. And yeah, we look forward to the new projects that you can't speak about at the moment, but it'll be exciting to see when they are complete. And I just want to leave everyone with a question, and we'll end it here. From me and Ayman, we are asking, in this current culture flourishing in the region, can art function as an effective mediator of change? And I put that in the comments as well. So thank you, everyone, and hope you all have a good evening, and hope to see you in 2 weeks' time for the next artist that will be announced in less than 2 weeks. I just want to let everyone know that now registration is through Eventbrite. So it's not through DM anymore. And that way the link is sent to everyone at the same time. All right. So thank you, everyone, and see you soon.